this is
we
where
don't want them to spend 3 hours putting the deck together for a half-hour meeting, right?
Correct. Right. Or even better yet, you don't need to have a meeting, right? Like
Right.
Talk about being proactive. What if you were able to go, and I think this is where the digital piece comes in. What if you were able to go and send that out on a set cadence, even if you don't have a meeting? A lot of people are scared to show bad data, but it actually can be a very effective tool in increasing adoption and getting your customers to realize the value that they've purchased your product or service in.
And once again, welcome to the Digital Customer Success Podcast with me, Alex Turkovich. So glad you could join us here today and every week as I seek out and interview leaders and practitioners who are innovating and building great scaled CS programs. My goal is to share what I've learned and to bring you along with me for the ride so that you get the insights that you need to build and evolve your own digital CS program. If you'd like more info, want to get in touch, or sign up for the latest updates, go to digitalcustomersuccess.com. For now, let's get started. Greetings and welcome to episode 43 of the Digital CS Podcast. So happy to have you back. As always, for those of you in the States, we are at the beginning of spring break week. So that means probably one of several scenarios. Either you took some time off and you're going on a trip, going camping, who knows what you're doing, or you're working from home with kiddos in the background. Either way, so no matter where you are, I'm so glad you joined us today. And I say us because I'm joined today by Nik Mijic, who's the co-founder of Matik. If you're not familiar with Matik, it's a super cool platform. You'll learn a little bit about it in this episode. But they specialize in populating content dynamically with data. Just really super cool stuff that is very, very CS related. And so obviously we talk about that and some of those technologies. We talk about the importance of data and benchmarking and how to use that with customers, feedback loops and, automations, Gen AI. We just kind of touch on a wide variety of things, and I think you'll find some really useful tidbits in this particular episode with Nik Mijic. Nik, it is Nik, right? It's not Nicola.
Yeah, I go by Nik.
You go by Nik. Do you ever? Who calls you Nicola?
My mom,
your parents,
my parents too, my siblings. But when I moved to the U.S. Nik was easier for people to pronounce, and so we ended up just going down that path, and it's kind of stuck. So Nik has been kind of what I've gone by over the past few years.
Yeah, for sure. And when we talked, like initially, I think we both kind of shared our kind of stories about moving to I moved to the U.S. when I was 10, yep. Austrian born, and you had kind of a similar journey, right?
Yeah, so I was born originally in Bosnia, so Sarajevo, Bosnia. Most of my family's from that area, and when the war happened, the Yugoslavian war, we fled to Hungary. From Hungary, we went to Germany, tried to stay in Germany, but we couldn't get our papers and citizenship, so because there were just so many refugees that were coming up from the Yugoslavian war, and ended up kind of applying all over the world, Canada, US, Australia, got accepted to the US, and my parents decided to come out here. So we moved here when I was 8 years old, and I was in Utah for a really long time, but I've been in the Bay Area now for about 11 years.
That's amazing. It's such a cool story. I mean, I love it when there's amazing, weird, circuitous stories into, just adulthood. Because I mean, there's few people that have straight shot, or I guess, and I think similarly to CS, like there's few people who have got into CS as well because it hasn't been around for that long.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I jumped right into it, but welcome to the podcast. It's super awesome to have you. And obviously, we're talking because of this wonderful thing you've built and are building with Matik. And I'd love to kind of get a little bit of an origin story of what led you into founding this company. and how your experiences kind of led you to want to do that, and just give us a sense for what it is you're trying to solve.
Totally.
I hate putting words in people's mouths when it comes to like, this is what you do, right?
Totally. Totally. Yeah, I guess the elevator pitch, kind of at a high level, just to starting there. Matic. What we do at Matic is we automate the creation of content within PowerPoint, Google Slide, or email with hyper personalized data in the forms of charts, tables, text, images that we insert into that content on your behalf. So we work a lot with customer success and sales teams across companies like Greenhouse, Asana, Glassdoor, to automate things like business reviews, renewal decks, ROI decks, automated one pagers that get sent out via emails, anything that incorporates data where you're trying to highlight value. And how the kind of idea originated is way back when I worked for a startup that was in the customer success space. That was a CS platform, very similar to Gainsight or Catalyst or any of those tools that CS teams use today. And one of the things when I was at the startup, our customers were always asking us, "Hey, we do these things, we do these decks and these ROI calculators and these business reviews. They're really, really time consuming, but they're extremely valuable to share with our customers." And so when I joined LinkedIn after the startup, I joined a team called Insights that basically we built internal tools and narratives for our customer success and sales teams. And so typically the workflow that we saw was you'd have a template, right, in PowerPoint or Google Slides stored somewhere for all the different touch points, whether it's a business review or a renewal deck, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you as a rep, let's say you had a business review with a client tomorrow, you'd go there, you make a copy of that template that had your design, everything. And then there would be instructions that would say, "Alex, go to Salesforce to get this metric. Go to Tableau, take this screenshot.
Use this, go to this report and go to the,
download this into Excel, do this math." And we had an internal tool that already existed at LinkedIn that kind of automated that process. And I had the chance to rebuild that. And it really kind of got me thinking, hey, I think there's a huge opportunity for this. And we saw such huge impact at LinkedIn, not just from a productivity standpoint, but this whole notion of when you're sharing this hyper personalized data driven content with your customers, it usually led to better business outcomes, right? Like adoption, renewals, upsells, and so forth. So I thought, hey, if this works for LinkedIn, there's got to be other companies that have a very similar problem. And so I've always been on the support side, meaning ops. I was always the data person that you would go to request data. And I met my co-founder through a mutual friend. He was an early engineer at Box. And I was like, hey, I've got this idea. I'm not entirely sure if I'm ready to quite leave LinkedIn, but I'd love to kind of noodle on this with you and see if it makes sense. And sure enough, him and I really hit it off. And the feedback we got from our network was really positive. So we took the leap of faith and started the company back in 2019. And fast forward to today, we're backed by some of the top tier VCs and Menlo Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz. We've raised 23 million to date, and again, work with a lot of companies like Asana, Glassdoor, Autodesk, and so forth to help their teams automate the creation of this content with hyper personalized, tables, charts, images, text, you name it.
That's so cool. It's awesome because I mean, obviously, it fits perfectly into the podcast, which is, digital customer success. And I think in a lot of ways, I feel like this is one of those kind of ideal maturity steps in a digital program is to be able to create kind of personalized content that's at your doorstep at the right persona at the right time and those kinds of things. And I think the digital business review is one thing that has been kind of elusive for a lot of folks, and I think still is in the mind of a lot of people. And so I love the idea that Matik is kind of at the front edge of really trying to solve for that. but going back to the digital CS theme, one thing that I do like to ask all of my guests is the standard question of, what's your elevator pitch of digital CS? Because everybody comes with, to the show with a slightly different flavor, slightly different background. There is no kind of one size fits all definition. So I'd love to kind of get your sense of what you would tell somebody that digital CS is.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a high level, digital CS is just kind of the ability to automate certain functions, right? That a typical CSM doesn't mean that we're going to totally eradicate the need for a traditional CSM,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to kind of automate some of these processes that will help alleviate the time for the CSM to do more strategic work, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I've heard and speaking to leaders and our customers around this concept of digital customer success is that they think it's only for their long tail of their business, right? It's like, hey, we're
Yeah.
only going to do this for accounts that are not touched by a CSM, when in reality, a digital CS program can probably benefit not just your long tail, but can also probably benefit your enterprise CSMs, your enterprise accounts that do have a CSM, to hopefully give them more
Mm-hmm.
time back, again, to do more strategic things that will hopefully lead to better business outcomes. So at a high level, that's kind of my thought on the concept.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that, and I, the again, the concept of a digital business review. What do you think the current state of the DBR is when you talk to customers and all that kind of stuff? Like,
Yeah,
what's the current
I
situation?
think taking a step back, I think a business review is just one touch point, right? I
Yeah.
think people who do this really, really well don't focus on a singular use case and take a more of a holistic approach where looking at all the different touch points in the customer life cycle, right? Whether it's onboarding, whether it's a business review, whether it's a renewal deck, whether it's,
Mm,
adoption, and they're trying to tie some sort of content to those touch points to be able to help the customer do some sort of action or realize some sort of value that your product or service has rendered.
yeah.
And so, in terms of speaking like specifically around the business review, I think today it's obviously really widely adopted, right? It's best practice to be able to go and do those. I think what we see typically with companies that we work with is that there is a resource constraint, right? With a typical, customer success where, hey, book of businesses are doubling, right? Given the macroeconomic climate. And as a result, we want our reps to do a lot of these business reviews or renewal decks or adoption reviews, but they don't have the time because it's so time consuming to put them together. And so this is
We don't want
where,
them to spend
yeah,
3 hours putting the deck together for a half-hour meeting, right?
correct, right? Or even better yet, you don't need to have a meeting, right? Like be
Yeah.
pro
Right.
talk about being proactive. What if you were able to go, and I think this is where the digital piece comes in. What if you were able to go and send that out on a set cadence, even if you don't have a meeting, to hopefully then get
Yeah.
a meeting where you can talk about more strategic things that you're trying to move the needle on. So uh, I think we're still kind of in the early stages of mainstream adoption, and I think some of the things that I've seen is one, you really have to have a good understanding of your data to a certain extent. I think that's always a big thing, is because it's digital.
Hmm.
It's you want to ensure that somebody's getting the right message, is getting the right data at the
Yeah.
right time, right? And
You want to
you
trust what
know
you have in the data. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think this whole notion of smart automation where, you can add that rule-based logic to indicate, hey, I know that if this is zero, we shouldn't be sending this out at all, right? And so,
Right.
or hey, if they don't have this product, we shouldn't be sending out this one pager at all because they're not going to be using it. So I think is some of that stuff that people are trying to figure out and map out that entire process. And if this is where we hopefully come in and can help with that, making sure that you feel comfortable and confident sending out this content to your customers without having too much worry.
Um, what my brain's going all over the place as you're talking because this is super exciting. But one of the things that I've talked about a lot recently is the crazy amount of variability that exists in digital CS, meaning that you've got multiple products to support. You've got internal folks, you've got external motions, you've got collaboration with different nations, you've got different tools. I mean, it's just the variables are insane to where if you were to you know pick up a strategy that worked in one organization and plunk it down on another one, it probably wouldn't work just because the variables aren't the same. I think it goes without saying. But what comes to mind as you're talking about this is persona specific
Yep.
use cases where you're sending different things to different personas. Also, the use cases around sending positive things is great, but also like letting an executive know that, hey, you're off track here and this is what you need to do to course
Totally.
correct. I'm just throwing shit out here. Sorry, pardon my French, but I'm throwing stuff out here because I would love to get a sense from you of what those use cases are beyond just like the business review of how people are using
Yeah.
cool ways and innovative ways I may be missing.
Totally. But I mean, that example of like, usage is a directional based off of implementation or how you get started with the product, right? And so I think in the
Mm-hmm.
onboarding
Mm-hmm.
phase, typically, there's probably certain milestones of like, hey, you've got this set up, Boolean fields, like you've got this set up, yes or no,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think this is a great where you can send out a one pager to not just the people that are tactically implementing your solution, but also including the decision makers and the leadership team on where the implementation is. So being able to send out a monthly review of where, if your product is very complex and there's a huge onboarding process, to be able to say, hey, here's where we're on track, here's where we're not,
Mm.
and so that everybody's fully aware. So like kind of automating like a project tracker of the onboarding process. And most companies have that codified at this point, right? If you're scaling and growing,
Yeah.
you can't be doing stuff ad hoc. You have to have some sort of a playbook. Being able to
Yeah.
send a one pager or an email around that is a simple use case that I think will allow you to do that. I think the other is this what we call like an adoption monthly newsletter, where it doesn't just give usage data of like how your team is using your product or service, but being also able to then translate that down to ROI. So in our case, time savings, productivity gain is a huge ROI component of our solution. So us being able to
Mm-hmm.
send, hey, here is the number of presentations your team has generated or emails that they've sent out with data-driven content. Here's what it would have taken pre-Matic. Here's what it is now with Matic. And this is the time savings and the ROI that we've been able to deliver. So being able to send that out on a monthly basis with recommendations is a great way to not only just throw data at your customer for the sake of showcasing data, but translating
Right.
that data to recommendations that they can act upon. And the hope is you are getting in front of it, even if it's bad, even if it doesn't show great results. If you do it early on, hopefully at that point, it'll cause your customer to be like, hey, Nick, what's going on? Usage is not what I expected, or ROI is not there. Let's jump on a call. It's easier to do that in month 3 versus month
Mm-hmm.
11, a month prior to the renewal. And so I do agree with you. I think a lot of people are scared to show bad data, but it actually can be a
Yeah.
very effective tool in increasing adoption and getting your customers to realize the value that they've purchased your product or service in.
Yeah, and also showing where you stack up against other,
Benchmarking,
customers
yes,
and similar,
totally.
yeah, benchmarking data. Like, hey, this is where you're doing great compared to your peers, and this is where you're not doing great compared to your peers. Is super powerful because it turns you
I
into
think
a consultant. Like you're turned into just not just a software vendor, but then you become a consulting arm of the company.
totally. I think some of our best customers, I think the people who are doing this extremely well in terms of leveraging data are people who are benchmarking, right? And I think there's so many ways we've written a lot of content about this on our blog in which
Mm,
you can visualize benchmarks, right? It can be a cohort of customers that look like you. It could be time based, even to say, hey, this is what you were, this is your results last year compared to this year, or quarter over quarter. That's technically a benchmark as well. But I think the more context you can provide in the data, I think the better it has to leading your customer to act on it, right? Versus just being like,
yeah.
cool, I generated X amount or I logged in this many times. I think that's not good enough anymore. You have to be able to rely it back to benchmarks. And then the other thing too is being able to tie it back to the goals and objectives of why they purchased your product or service, right? Like
Hmm.
everything that you share post purchase should tie back to why they purchased your product to begin with. And hopefully
Yeah.
over time, you have a library of objectives that are most common across your customer base. I know that some companies may not be able to do that, but
Right.
in order to really scale, you're going to have to try to come up with some sort of a library, and then you can then, just similar to the personas, you can then start creating content that's tied to those business objectives that say, hey, Alex bought for this reason. So here are the metrics that we associate with that objective to help them realize that value. And that's what we're going to be
Hmm.
including in our ongoing content that we generate for Alex, right?
Where's this all going? Like, you know, I mean, obviously there's this whole generative AI piece that's lingering in the corner and coming into play, but you know, it's not completely like we can't just plug it in and use it. It still requires kind of human effort. But like, what are you and the team talking about in terms of, okay, we can populate these things and we can provide contextual, relevance, which in itself is a big leap forward. But what are you guys talking about?
I think one of the things that really excites us as an organization and the feedback that we've gotten, right, is we've typically had what I've called smart automation, like the intelligence layer within Matic allows you to do rule-based logic that says, hey, if this happens in the data, or delete this slide or add this chart instead, right, to help you get to close to 100% automation as possible, right?
Yeah.
I think generative AI can kind of come in, especially when it comes to our space, is taking it a step further and really covering the edge cases. So what I mean by that is
Mm.
we just had an AI summit back in September where we had folks from OpenAI and others join and talk about AI within the CS motion. And we talked about what we launched called automated insights, where we can not only populate, let's say, a chart on a slide or a table on a slide, but scan the data that we're sending to that chart and give you the three key takeaways that summarize the trend. So, for example, if you have like number of presentations generated over time that we share with our customers,
Hmm.
it can actually look at that data, analyze, and say, hey, here was a top template that was being used. Here's the percent growth or decline. So that way, you're not doing the heavy lifting and not just putting the data into the presentation, but Matic is now also analyzing that data and giving you the key takeaways and the exact summary that you can then share and alter that you go and share with your
Yeah.
customers. So I'm really excited about that last mile piece of not just being able to create the content, but also taking it a step further and covering some of those edge cases that you can't do with rule-based logic that really kind of has to happen on the fly. And I think AI has a really a good possibility of helping us solve that problem.
Yeah, for sure. Because, like you pointed out earlier, like a piece of data is great, but it doesn't mean anything unless you tie some insights to it and some
Totally.
meaning to it. So that's super cool and an awesome use of AI. I know you work with a lot of sales teams as well, and obviously, I think the use case is very different from a pre-sale to a post-sale perspective. And I was curious just to get your sense on, you know, what that kind of looks like and how you've I guess how you've worked with your customers to like you know make sure it gets adopted kind of in both worlds equally, and maybe is there like is there internal thing use cases and things like that as well?
Yeah, typically our primary persona has been customer success followed by
Hmm.
sales. We have gotten a huge internal poll to be like, hey, our FP&A team puts this content together for internally every single month, and it's a huge pain to put together. We haven't
Hmm.
focused our energy there, just given the demand on the externally facing content
Yeah.
that sales and customer success put together. For sales in particular, some of the common use cases that we see is like pricing proposals, right? ROI
Hmm.
calculators. It's more assumptive based where you put together a business case that's based on assumptions that you would put in a calculator that says, hey, here's the ROI that you're going to get from our service, Alex, or product over the next 12 months if you decide to purchase our product, right?
Yeah.
We see a lot of those use cases as well as going back to benchmarking, one of the things that I think really savvy sales organizations have done is taking the aggregated customer usage of their customer base and then being able to translate that over on the pre-sale side to say, hey, look, a customer that looks like you, meaning your industry, your size, whatever it may be, here are on
Hmm.
average the results that they get with our product or service, right? So it's being able to illustrate to, and like I said, I think you have to have data in order to do that. We work a lot with mid-market enterprise customers, so they've been around for a while and they're able to go and aggregate that information and then include that within their pitch deck, for example, to hopefully get someone to cross the line.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about data, right? And the fact that a lot of customers struggle with data. A lot of everyone struggles with data, and you got to have some clean data to be able to feed some of this stuff. But what are some of the other things where you would look at a prospect and go, "You're ready, you're not ready"? Like, what are the stumbling blocks that you try to kind of advise customers on?
So to be clear, I think one, no one's data is perfect. You've probably worked
No.
at a lot of companies. I've worked at a few as well, and there's not one company that I have worked for where like the data is perfect. So, or doesn't have issues. I think that's just the name of the game.
Or there's too
Especially
much of it.
too much of it, and also think about it. CRM, a lot of it is like naturally inputted data. So there's going to be a
Hmm.
lot of discrepancies when it comes to that. So I don't think the state of your data needs to be perfectly clean to get started, uh,
Yeah.
especially if you do have rule-based logic that can kind of prevent to make sure that they're not going to get something that they shouldn't. A customer or a prospect is not going to
Sure.
get something
Yeah.
that they shouldn't. I think another thing that we see quite a bit in terms of readiness is people think that they need to have like a perfect template or use case to begin with. And I think one of the things that we tell our prospects and our customers is content is similar to building software. It's not like
Mhm.
you'll come up with let's say you're a leader, you put together a business review template for your team, right? 6 to 12 months from now, it may look different because they use it,
Yeah.
they get feedback. Hey, Alex, slides 3 and 4 are great, but you know what? This isn't really resonating as much. I've combined it into one slide and it's been amazing. Or, hey, instead of talking about ROI this way, I've talked about it this way and this has resonated. And so part of it too is you got to get something out the door to get feedback, and there needs to be feedback
Mhm.
loops to continue to iterate on that content because your product is evolving, your process may be evolving, your content also needs to be evolving. And going back to
Yeah.
the building software analogy, when your team ships product, it's not like they ship and say, hey, we're done. We're not going to
Right.
touch it anymore. People start using it, they get feedback, and then they start making enhancements and iterating on it. So I think
Hmm.
that's also another misconception that you have to have everything or boiling the ocean, right? Like you got to get started somewhere, start with a few use cases, and then build on top of that. And typically it's a business review that people start with. Then they go to a one pager, then they go to like an adoption review, then they do a benchmarking report, a renewal deck. So you don't have to have all of it in place. And this is where the AI is also can be extremely impactful, right? Like we have out of the box templates where you give us your website and we will actually generate a best practice business review with your branding and if you don't have those resources, your branding and some of the metrics that we've gotten from your website that we think are going to be applicable to you as a starting point, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think AI can definitely help close that gap as well.
Yeah. I mean, the number one question that I get, from folks is, where do I start? And I give them your answer, which is you start somewhere, and then you build upon it and you iterate it. And if you have one data set that's super clean and it solves an issue, like, don't
Further,
hesitate to send that email or to get that thing out or to ship it.
I had a mentor of mine who gave me some early on in my career, gave me some really, really great advice and said, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. And I think that's
Hmm.
so true in the situation where I think we are so enamored with being perfect,
Yeah.
shipping something that
Hmm.
is really perfect when in reality, that's really limiting the progress that we have as an organization.
Yeah. And when it comes to digital CS, a lot of folks think that it's this black box, like you either have it or you don't have it, which is interesting, to think about. But it's totally not the case. It's like you have it by building upon, the things that you implement and growing it over time and getting more sophisticated over time, and working your way into a maturity model. You don't start at level 4 or 5 of a maturity level. You start at level 1 or 2, depending on what you have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one other thing to add to that, as you were saying that, is I think the notion of feedback loops I think is really important in digital CS, right? Because you usually have
Mm-hmm.
a small group of individuals that are setting up these programs holistically for your organization, and they might
Yeah.
be on the front lines, they might not be on the front lines, and making sure that you're constantly having a health check with your on top of your programs to be like, hey, are there changes that we need to make? How do we know what changes we need to make? Where are we getting that feedback? What's qualitative? What's quantitative? I think is hugely important to make sure that you have long-term success and not just short-term success with your program.
Yeah. And I think it goes beyond just the survey. It's like actually exchanging mouth words sometimes. One of the things that I've taken from, I guess, a former and current professional life in learning and development is the Kirkpatrick model, which is basically, how you evaluate the effectiveness of a piece of training content. But I think it's wildly applicable for automations in general, or just, really anything agile related, where you have these various ways of measuring efficacy of something that you've implemented, whether it's like the immediate impact of, thumbs up, thumbs down, or the long term impact of how has this affected your business in a positive or negative way. Um, it's interesting to think about.
Totally. And I would argue too that I think early on you're probably going to be more reliant upon qualitative, subjective feedback, like the
Yeah.
conversations that you have with your customers one off, right? Or maybe some CSMs that get their input. And then over time, as the program becomes more and more established, hopefully those feedback loops are more data driven and you can see it in the data. And I think a lot of people want to start with the latter, when in reality you got to start with the
Mm-hmm.
former first in order to get to the latter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you really do. You really do. That's awesome. Um, what's in your content diet? Like what are you paying attention to? What do you feed your brain when you're not like, deeply entrenched in Matic?
With content in terms of like business or outside of work, anything, all
Anything.
the above.
Anything. Yep.
Yeah. I do. Well, I'm a big soccer fan, so
Mhm.
I do watch a lot of soccer to kind of de-stress from the work life. When it comes to work, I do think there's some, especially when it comes to CS, I think there's some great thought leadership out there that I'm always, I think Nik Mijic has done a fantastic job at Gainsight. I think the folks at
Yep.
Catalyst as well do an amazing job. I think Vitally produces some really great content, Plan Hat as well. And I think that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I've been, being in CS. Like I remember when I was at the CS startup, what now, over 8, 9 years ago, such an tech in CS was so early on. And they were
Mhm.
kind of building these foundational blocks for thought leadership. And just to see how many thought leaders there are now and the exchange of ideas across these different groups, I think has been fantastic. So I definitely try to stay up to date with all of the major CS players out there and pay attention to what they have to say.
Yeah. Well, you gave a couple of shout outs already, Nik Meta and the bunch, but are there any specific folks that you feel are doing really great work in digital?
In terms of companies, particular,
Yeah,
or
or
just like
companies
tech.
or individuals that are building cool programs, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have some great customers. I think the folks at Greenhouse have done a fantastic
Mm.
job. We work with them. We've published a case study where they've done a really good job at incorporating data into their content, but without just the sake of data, but really trying to tie it to objectives of their customers and tying it back to value and ROI, and just to see how much they've done has been amazing. I think they have some of the best templates in the market right now and what they've been able to audit.
Yeah. And somebody else mentioned them as well as a outstanding contributor. And I forget who it was and which episode it was, but yeah, that's good stuff. Look, I've really appreciated your time and your insight, and I love what you guys are doing, because I think it's so needed, especially right now where the need to prove efficacy and to drive outcomes within your customers is more needed than ever before. So it's awesome to have that insight, and I appreciate the time. Where can people find you, engage with you? Any parting words? Any webinars coming up that you want to promote? Any kind of I know you're going to have some paternity leave coming up, so congratulations on that. But yeah, this is it's like end of Hot Ones if you watch that show. It's like
Totally.
to promote or just say hi or where you can engage.
Totally. I mean, being a former LinkedIner, always feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Try to be very active on the platform. If you want to learn more, obviously, about our product or solution or what we do, feel free to go to our website, matik.io. Feel free to fill out a demo request form, and our team can kind of give you an overview of our solution and the problems that we're trying to solve for. So those are probably the two best mediums to go through.
Amazing. Cool. Well, again, I appreciated the time. Thanks for giving us your knowledge.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Alex. Really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital Customer Success Podcast. If you like what we're doing, consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps us to grow and to provide value to a broader audience. You can view the Digital Customer Success definition word map and get more details about the show at digitalcustomersuccess.com. My name is Alex Turkovich. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.